If I say the name MaryBeth Lewis, does it mean anything to you? I absolutely hope you will think of this New York Times article that just came out called "She Wanted Her 15th Child, Then the Felony Charges Came." The story focuses on a woman in New York, not the city, the state, and IVF, surrogacy, legal complications, family, Catholicism. It's really interesting, and it's happening in real time now. I will link the article below, but I'm going to give you a summary of what's going on and touch on some of the themes that stood out to me. It's important to me that we talk about surrogacy and IVF. I know they're controversial. I know people have a lot of different opinions about them, but it's cases like this and the debate that follows that I think will really help us understand what role it plays as we move forward in a science embracing and maybe not super family embracing society. So let's get into it. So in the year 2025, MaryBeth Lewis is a 68-year-old nurse. She's been married forever to her longtime husband, Bob, who is a pilot. They have 15 children, 13 children. This is the question. So MaryBeth and Bob, we'll go through the background. By the way, MaryBeth spells her name capital M, Mary, capital B, Beth, like it's all one word. As also the owner of a double name, it's an interesting choice. My name is two separate, but all in the first name box. So that's totally an aside. I do not recommend double names for your children if you live in America. A different aside, I'll make a video on it if you really need me to. No one cares about this. Anyways, MaryBeth met Bob in 1982 on St. Patrick's Day. They fell in love. He's a pilot. They traveled. They had 5 children together. So during the normal times, let's say through their 20s, early 30s, she has 5 children. And when the 5 girls, they're all girls in the beginning, they sometimes refer to themselves as the originals, reached high school, started moving out, MaryBeth basically got lonely and wanted more kids. And she felt an urge. I think big families are great. 5 is already a pretty big family by most standards. But she and her husband went through IVF. At that time, I believe she was in her 40s, and she conceived more children, and they had, another round of children, as they say. In the article, and I encourage everyone to read that if you're interested in this, talk about how her friends were surprised, but also, she had a lot of energy. She loved children. It was going well. Later, MaryBeth is older and decides she wants more children. And because of some of the complications with surrogacy centers, IVF clinics in New York, they end up not using their own embryos, but essentially purchasing a batch of embryos, meaning children who have been created, they're frozen on ice, but they are not biologically related to MaryBeth and Bob. I'm really simplifying a complicated process here. But again, you can refer to the article if you want more details about their family planning. You should just know they have the originals, 5 girls in the beginning. They have another set through IVF that are biologically theirs. And they have another set through IVF that are not biologically theirs. MaryBeth seems pretty well supported by her husband. The article talks a little about the family dynamics, some of the emotional things that go with this. All interesting. I'm going to stay focused more on the legal stuff. Eventually, MaryBeth, in her, at this point, early 60s, decides that she wants more children, but she is unable to carry them. And also, more importantly, her husband does not want more children. At this point, they have 13. Bob is approaching the mandatory retirement age for pilots, and he says, I didn't want any more. She did. Now, he'll also say throughout the article that their marriage basically centered on the principle that what MaryBeth wanted, she got. And they'll talk about the reporter talks about the fact that he was often gone. He's a pilot. He's traveling for several weeks out of the month. She's alone raising their kids. So this is where it takes the crazy turn to me. MaryBeth, early 60s, mid 60s, says, even though Bob is saying he wants to retire, that he's done at 13 children. 13 is a lot. She says, I don't care. I'm doing it anyways. So she begins the process of finding a surrogate and moving forward with implanting the remaining frozen embryos that they own into a surrogate, which is fascinating. Hello? Sorry, brief pause while my producer Moon popped in. She didn't want to stay, though. Where was I? So Bob is done. He says 13 is enough. We've got a batch of children. I don't need any more. I'm about to retire. Let's travel, whatever. MaryBeth says, no, more children. Except she doesn't really say this. MaryBeth proceeds to go through the process of finding a surrogate without Bob. She says, she gives a justification for it. I'll let you guys read it. But she decides that she wants the children. She's the one raising them anyways. The children will be had. Now, she is unable to carry the children at this age, so she begins looking for a surrogate. Now, the big issue is that New York passed a law in 2021 requiring people involved in surrogate agreements to obtain a parentage order, and it has to be issued by the court. So this becomes a problem. And I'll pause here to say different states regulate this differently. It's one of the challenges, I will say, for the surrogacy industry. It's regulated differently in different countries. They all have different laws. But in the U.S., it varies state to state. So I'll pause here and say, I'll continue to give the information, but know that there's a chance that in a different state, this same scenario has come up and they have resolved it completely differently. It's such a wild west out there, as is a lot of stuff with IVF and fertility treatment. Now, sometimes there are good things that come out of the wild west, but sometimes there are a lot of moral complications we all need to sort through. So MaryBeth is determined to have another child, and she fakes her husband's involvement. She forges his signature on documents. At one point, there's a Zoom court meeting, and she logs in on a separate computer as him, quote unquote, with the screen dark, claiming to be traveling in Japan for work, and like grunts, I guess, when they ask him to like comment on anything. I assume he didn't have to say very much. And she is able to obtain the parentage order. Eventually, I mean, this one went so far as to set up a P.O. box to have all the mail from her lawyer, from the court, everything sent there. She's met with a surrogate. The surrogate becomes pregnant. Like, she is moving along full steam ahead. Bob, the pilot, no idea, not involved. But the court sends a letter to their house at one point. And Bob, who has known nothing about this, I mean, even when like cribs were arriving, he was saying like, "Well, who is this for?" And his wife, MaryBeth, was saying, "Oh, well, our oldest daughter's expecting a baby. It's for her." Like, she just lied to this guy. Anyways, so the court order arrives, or the letter from the court arrives, and Bob finds out, and Bob is able to obtain her lawyer's information, and he is basically like, "I didn't consent to any of this. None of this has anything to do with me." The lawyer that MaryBeth is working with feels an ethical obligation to report it to the court. Later, a different set of lawyers will question the attorney-client privilege. If Bob was never her client because he never knew, who does she owe loyalty to? I don't know. It's very complicated. Anyways, the surrogacy journey is complicated. There's a lot of back and forth, but basically it's the parentage order is terminated, but the surrogate is still carrying these children who are embryos obtained by MaryBeth and Bob originally. Bob goes back on it. He says, basically rather than face a divorce and his marriage falling apart, he decides to say, "I actually am in support. I want these kids. We're all in it together." More legal back and forth. Eventually, the surrogate gives birth to these twins. It's a boy and a girl. We don't know their names. I think that's fine. MaryBeth goes to the hospital, and they're like, "Get out of here. You cannot be a part of this." And ultimately, MaryBeth is charged with a combination of attempted kidnapping, fraud, several felony charges, and the twins are not released to her. They go into foster care. So that's not good. The twins are in foster care for 2 years while this legal battle unfolds. It's still unfolding. And it's kind of heartbreaking to hear about. I mean, at one point, their foster parents petition the court to adopt them. At a different point, MaryBeth, through different lawyers, is able to get parentage reestablished in New York State. So the twins get their last name, and there's a line in the article where it says, "And this is when she learned the names, which she plans to change." This woman set the ball into motion that would bring these twins into the world, but also didn't know their names because legally these twins were born with no parents under New York state law. No parents. Isn't that crazy? Because the surrogate's not their mom. MaryBeth isn't their mom. Bob is sort of not involved, but also isn't legally allowed to be their dad because at that point the parentage order wasn't established. And their biological parents let go of these embryos. So they just had no one. The foster parents raised them for 2 years, apparently get called mom and dad. It's heartbreaking to hear their perspective of it. They obviously care a lot about these kids. In a lot of states, including New York, the goal is to keep sibling sets together. So this is interesting because MaryBeth and Bob, their last set of children, are the biological siblings of these twins. Remember, they had their original 5 daughters, they had another set of biological children through IVF, and they had a third set of children that are not biologically theirs that MaryBeth carried, but the embryos are not made with any of their genetic matter. Complicated, right? Super complicated family. Not a traditional large Catholic family, which, by the way, this is kind of a running theme because MaryBeth and Bob are Catholic. And she says that when Bob said, I don't want any more children, she didn't want to stop paying the $50 fee they had to freeze the remaining adopted embryos, and because that would be destroying life. They note in this article, and also a judge involved in this at one point points out, that the Catholic Church actually doesn't approve of IVF. And so therefore, if she were really a devout Catholic, she wouldn't have gone through any of this at all. I know Catholics who have gone through IVF. I'm sure it's complicated. I know the desire to have a family is really strong. I know that IVF is controversial to a lot of people. Nonetheless, we'll proceed with the combo of IVF and surrogacy. So these twins are born and they are just in legal limbo where they have no parents, but they also have kind of too many parents. And it seems like a nightmare. I don't really have a lot of ways to resolve this other than to say this is sort of what science has wrought. And I wonder what the best path forward for the twins are. I would love it if you would tell me what you think it is. I find the story so fascinating because MaryBeth is obviously a complicated character. I'm saying character. She's a real life person. And she gives her thoughts in this interview. She talks about the feeling of wanting children, raising them, and her I guess, extreme maternal instinct. But also, children thrive best in marriage, and it seems like marriage was not really her priority. At least she doesn't seem to respect her husband that much. And ultimately, she brought 2 children into the world who were then left adrift, who are bonding to people. I mean, at this point, the twins are 2 years old. They're born in 2023. And they might have new last names and first names any day now, depending on how courts rule. It's crazy. It's wild. I mean, I know for so many people, IVF allows them to have a family, and I can only imagine that we have that technology for good reasons, but isn't also our obligation to guard this technology carefully? Should we be in a position where couples look at each other and say, well, we have 4, 5, 6 more eggs in the freezer, but we feel done, so we should just throw them out? That's, to me, it's an impossible. I could never do that, but I'm also not in that position. It's just this Wild West science world where at this point I also question New York State's laws. Like, what does it take to get a parentage order? And also, wouldn't this parentage order, like, if you're required to get it under the 2021 law that New York State passed, shouldn't they have gotten it before they implanted the embryos in the surrogate? So therefore, if they weren't going to get the parentage order, then they wouldn't have moved forward. It's not clear to me that that's a requirement under the law. I'll have to do more research, I guess. And also, what would stop someone like MaryBeth, who feels compelled to have more children and at this point doesn't feel the need to carry them biologically, from going across state lines and doing something similar? I mean, it's fascinating, right? There was a story a couple months ago of I think Chinese national couple who were arrested in California who had they were claiming to run a surrogacy agency. They were telling surrogates, oh, we have 1 child, we just want 1 more. And they had, a dozen children, all under the age of 3 in their home. And it seemed like a very risky situation. There was an implication that there was a lot of suspicious activity afoot. It was possible because of IVF and surrogacy. This seems dangerous. And again, I think there are so many families that are created because of IVF. But has this Pandora's box been opened too far? I really don't know. I'd love to hear what you guys think of the story. If you guys have read the story, I would love to hear your thoughts. I want to end with a quote from the article. I find it really poignant, and it just seems like we live in science fiction. I don't know how to put it otherwise. So this is from the New York Times article. What makes a woman a mother? MaryBeth's case became a legal quagmire in part because everyone involved had a different answer and visceral reaction to that deceptively simple human question. There's genetic motherhood, the woman who provides the egg from which the embryo is created. There is gestational motherhood. New research shows that a woman who carries the fetus, even if not genetically related, can influence the eventual gene expression. And there's social motherhood, the woman who raises the child. Most mothers are all three. In cases of adoption or surrogacy, those roles can be divided between 2 or even 3 women. But MaryBeth was none of them. She shared neither DNA, nor her womb, nor her home with baby A and B. To locals' attorneys arrays against her, MaryBeth wasn't a mother. She was closer to a human trafficker. So anyways, I think this is a fascinating case. I think that we will hear a lot about these cases. In fact, I have heard stories about complications with surrogacies when the people who initiate the surrogacy contract want to terminate the pregnancy or who don't want to move forward in some way. It is a legal gray area, and I think because legalese is so heavy, sometimes they are hard to be chronicled. But I was really glad to see that this story was published by the New York Times. Even if maybe some of their conclusions are not ones that I agree with, it's important that we see the decisions that we are making as a society play out and impact the lives around them. So anyways, let me know what you think is best for these twins. Let me know if you know any other stories like this. And thanks for watching.